My name is Leela Jenkins, and I'm going to share my screen so that you can follow along with everything that we're talking about. Let's 1 second. All right, so this is Inclusion 101, and like I said, I am Leela Jenkins. I work for the Florida Inclusion Network. We are a discretionary project of the state of Florida, and we're funded by the Bureau of Exceptional Student Education under the IDEA, Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. And that is something, it's a service that we provide to everyone across the state to support anything that has to do with people, students in an inclusive educational setting. So this is our mission, just to be clear of what we do for the students in your county. Let's see, it says here that we work with schools, we provide customized support, we work with parents, families, anyone in the district that has any questions about anything that has to do with kids. We want to make sure that kids with disabilities are in the right place and getting education and social experiences along with their peers. I'm decided to change it up a little bit and go ahead and put my email out in the beginning. If you have questions as they come up, you can email me during this presentation or later on when you're thinking about it. I will also give you my email at the end of the presentation as well. I will tell you it's ljenkins4@fsu.edu or ljenkins@contactfin.com. Sometimes just having an opportunity to send the questions as you're thinking of them is great, and I welcome that. My plan for tonight is to give you a very brief introduction into inclusion and what it looks like in our classrooms today. I want you to have an opportunity to understand how inclusive education supports kids with disabilities, and maybe give you some ways to identify if inclusion is working for your child or what to look for to know that inclusive practices are happening in a classroom or a school. And then I'm going to give you some tips on how you can support effective inclusion strategies and practices for your child. So I don't know if you have a learner that is in a self-contained classroom and is thinking about moving towards an inclusive classroom, or if you are in an inclusive classroom and you're not sure if it's the right fit, or if you have a student who doesn't have disabilities and they're in an inclusive classroom and you don't really know what that's about. So these are some questions that we throw out there to see if this is where your mindset is, if this is what you're looking for the education for your students or your children, sorry. They're here on the screen, and I'll read a few of them. I'm not sure if the green is hard to read or not. Is it important for your child to learn, play, and work side by side students without disabilities? Can your child benefit from teachers who have high expectations for all the children? Does your child or learner learn best when a variety of teaching methods are provided? Is it important for your child to focus on goals that are connected to their interests, learning styles, future dreams, or unique needs? Do you want your learner to learn along the same topics that their peers are learning, their same age peers and their grade level peers are learning? Do you want them to feel good about what they have learned and accomplished at school? Do you believe that it's possible that peers at your child's school can serve as good role models for learning, communicating, and socializing? And is it important to you that your child shares tasks and solve problems and develops friendships with non-disabled peers? Do you want them to learn strategies that will help them after graduation? And is it important to prepare your child for a successful adult life that includes being part of society, living, working, going on vacation, having friendships, relationships, that sort of thing. Um, we ask these questions because research shows that the likelihood of that happening, um, lifelong outcomes are so incredibly benefited by being in a classroom with the same age peers. So, and I just mentioned research. What do the laws and research say? Why are we talking about inclusion? Why why are we here? Why is this a thing? So I will tell you. And we go all the way to federal law, where we start, and as these laws dictate what we do as educators. Both of the laws I will talk about federally and the statewide statute say that students with disabilities do not have to earn their way into a regular class setting with their peers. We do not do a checklist before a kid is allowed in quotes, into a gen ed classroom. These two federal laws, both of them say that gen ed placement is the first placement. It is the first place that we're looking or putting students. The law on the left is ESSA, which stands for Every Student Succeed Act. It was passed in 2015. It is the federal law that replaced No Child Left Behind. So if you hear someone saying No Child Left Behind, you can let them know that that was replaced a while ago. So this law is it's the gen ed law. It tells gen ed teachers where our priorities are. It says that all students are gen ed first, that they must be taught to high standards, and that if a student is at risk of failing, we have to address it. It says that we use universal design for learning to support the needs for all children. The law on the right is IDEA, Intellectuals with Disabilities Education Act. It was the first iteration of it was passed in 1975. Before that, students with disabilities were not invited to have an education. The most current iteration we have now is in 2004. This law is specifically for learners with disabilities. And this also says that general education classroom is the first placement considered by the IEP team. And we're only removing this learner if the supports and services are not enough. Even when we're removing a learner from the gen ed placement with their peers, the IEP team still has to plan for how we're going to include that child. I know there's a lot of words on this slide. I promise I will go through it. Talking about removing a child from placement with their peers, there's a term that we use called least restrictive environment. We want our learners, we want our humans, all people in the least restrictive environment. And so what that means in IDEA language is that to the maximum extent appropriate, our students with disabilities must be in public or private institutions or other care facilities. They must be educated with students who are not disabled. And then at the bottom, it says, again, that we're only removing them or putting them in special classes or putting them in separate schools or removing them in any other way when the nature or severity of the disability is such that education in a regular class cannot be achieved satisfactorily, or when the supplementary aids and services are not enough. The statute number is also on the bottom if anyone's curious to look that up. So essentially, inclusion allows for students with disabilities to get the best practices and instructional methods that get that customized support for their learning. So in a general education classroom with a general education teacher and a special education teacher together. The student in an inclusive classroom has two teachers. And I'll talk more about that in a little bit. But they are in the setting getting all of the customized instruction that their peers are also getting. The federal law that I just talked about, ESSA and IDEA, they tell us that we include these children, that our learners are placed gen ed first. And then we support them in the way that is necessary based on their learning disabilities. Florida is the only state that has decided to take it farther, and define it. And the state definition is in our statute, and it guides us even more of, it tells us even more how we inclusion should look. And so it's 4 bullet points, and I'm going to go over them briefly. Florida defines inclusion as a student with a disability in getting their education in a general education setting, reflecting natural proportions and age-appropriate heterogeneous groups in core academic and elective or special areas in the school community. Natural proportions means the proportion of children with disabilities and children without disabilities in the classroom mimics that of the district or the state. And then age-appropriate heterogeneous groups, we're talking about if a student is in 10th grade, but with an intellectual disability, they read on a 4th grade level, they're still in the 10th grade with their peers, not working with 4th graders. Second, it says in state statute, fascinatingly, that a student with a disability is a valued member of the classroom and school community. So here we have actual legislative documents that say we will and we must value students with disabilities in our school community like any other child. Teachers and administrators support universal education and have the knowledge and support available to them. Universal education is everyone gets education, education for all. And finally, the access is to technical assistance is provided to meet the special tailored needs of a student. Technical assistance are things that very specific questions about testing or about accommodations, things that, again, anything that has to do with a kid with a disability in a gen ed classroom. And I can be that technical assistance as well as any specialist in your county. So those are the 4 bullet points of Florida's definition of inclusion. So essentially, it is a civil right for all students to be educated and educated in their least restrictive environment. And we want students with their peers as much as possible because this next slide, 40 years of research tells us that students with mild disabilities all the way to significant disabilities in inclusive settings show growth and gain social and communication skills more so than if they were in a self-contained setting. So here are some of the findings over the past 40 years of research. They develop friendships, and students with disabilities increase their participation and their independence, their self-advocacy. There's more movement on their IEP goals, as well as learning the general education material that their peers are learning. They develop positive behaviors, participate in school activities. They have fewer absences. They enjoy going to school more. And they are better prepared for this college, community, career, all of those things that we want for our students. And continuing more with the findings, when implemented with fidelity, and that is a big caveat, teaching in an inclusive classroom must be done with fidelity. But it yields these results for all learners, students with and without disabilities. Students develop better attitudes and improve social skills. Teachers collaborate to share effective research-based teaching strategies, and schools report having positive student results on assessments. There is nothing about having a student with a disability in your classroom that's going to bring your assessment results down. In fact, it's going to keep them or improve them. Students are, because they're all getting access to new and different strategies, it really benefits all learners. And again, this is more updated research. I can't say enough how this is not just because this is what's right for kids. This is proven to be what's right for kids. Inclusive education results in better academic outcomes, and then significantly greater growth and development of literacy skills than in otherwise similar peers. That's from 2012. So this is always one of my favorite things to talk about. What about the kids that don't have disabilities? Like I said, they do benefit from teachers collaborating, from new and different strategies coming into the classroom, but long run, they also benefit from living and learning with kids with all sorts of different learning needs. They benefit academically from providing the support, from supporting any learner. They are processing their own learning while supporting another learner. They develop friendships as well, and they learn to advocate for people with disabilities. They're prepared to see, oh, this is my favorite one. They are prepared to succeed in workplaces with diverse customers and colleagues. In a world where we are not a self-contained world, our students without disabilities are learning that everyone is different and becoming more comfortable with that as each generation passes. Then they raise the expectations of the peers that do have disabilities. So these are the next few things that I'll talk about are some concepts that you may have heard before, or they may be new to you, but what they are concepts that really show that a school or a learning environment is on the having an inclusive mindset. And you might see these already, and I guarantee that you do. And a lot of the schools that I am in the region, we see a lot of really positive things happening. So the first thing is something called person-first language, changing our language where we address or talk about a student as the student and not the disability of the student. So the example I can use are students that use access point standards. Instead of saying my access point kid, we would say my student's using access points. Or this child in the image, in the past, people would say he is Down syndrome or he's got Down syndrome, and we just would say he's a student with Down syndrome. If anything, you'd want to call them by their name. But if you don't know their name, we want to encourage everyone to use that person-first language and call them by their personhood before you're addressing their label. On the slide, there's some other examples. One I hear a lot is like my behavior student. And instead, we would want to say my student that has behavior challenges. It's just putting that person, and it really speaks to your entire classroom culture, your school culture, and language is powerful, and it can do a lot to change how we're describing people or referring to people. Can do a lot to show how we value them. I will say there is a caveat in person-first language. The deaf community is very clear in preferring identity-first language, where they preferred to be called deaf people. So that's just the only caveat. And we know language changes through time. This right now is best practices. So that's person-first language. Another concept is called presumed competence. We also call this the least dangerous assumption. So it is a dangerous assumption to say that a child can't read. That is dangerous to their future. It's dangerous to their education and their attitude in that moment. So we want to presume competence at all times. We know that the right supports and services can get the student where they need to be. It might take longer than it's taken in the past. Every learner is different. So presumed competence is something that we look for in when we're talking to teachers, or when you're talking to the adults that work with your student. You want to look for that mindset, which leads into something that's pretty common around this region, which is growth mindset. Growth mindset is based in research. It is a real thing. Um, Knowing that someone may not have learned it yet. That's the term, and that's presumed competence, that they might not know it, they just don't know it yet. Growth mindset is the belief and the teaching that your mind is a muscle and it grows with failure. So you don't have to do it perfect. The more you stretch your mind, the more you work out, the more you fail, the stronger your mind becomes. And that's the growth mindset. And I know that you've probably seen that, a lot of that in schools. That's a very, very popular concept and way of thinking about learning. And that growth mindset is something that isn't just for kids with disabilities, it's for everybody. Everyone should have a growth mindset and learn about how they can stretch their brain. I mentioned universal design for learning at the beginning when I was talking about the federal law ESSA. Universal design for learning is really cool. You see this picture here of the person in the wheelchair and the ramp. That is universal design. Universal design comes from architecture. Universal design means everyone can use the ramp, wheels or no wheels. That's designed to let everyone in the building. So universal design for learning is where the classroom is designed before we even have the learners in the room. We have designed our classroom for the student that needs a calming space, for the student that needs enrichment, for the student that needs, I can't think of another third one, the student that needs manipulatives for math. So we've pre-designed our classroom for all these needs instead of waiting to get the kids and then being only responsive. Universal design for learning is proactive. So seeing something like that, seeing multiple ways to engage students in a classroom, that is inclusive. Again, it benefits every learner in that room, not just kids with disabilities. The other term here is differentiation. Differentiation is what happens after we know the learners, after we've got their, well, see, we're in the beginning of the school year right now, so we've got their baseline testing. We know where they are. Now we know how to differentiate some instruction based on where they are. So with UDL, we are proactive, and then with differentiation, we are reactive to meet the needs of all these learners. And then this is some, I guess, some little vocabulary, maybe some, just a little bit of information for your benefit if you're working with students. If you have a student with a IEP and maybe there's some language confusion, accommodations and modifications are words that we use as well in education for students with disabilities. However, they're not used interchangeably. Accommodations are what? Nope, no. I erased that. Accommodations are how the student is learning, how they are accessing the information. Is it through a graphic organizer? Is it through manipulatives? Is it a special pencil grip? How they are accessing the learning. It doesn't change their standard. Modifications are where we are actually changing what the student is learning. This applies to students with intellectual disabilities who have modified standards. And here in Florida, they're called access point standards. So when a student is getting similar information but has a lower benchmark, that's called modifications. So accommodations is the how, modifications are the what they're learning. And this is very exciting, because when you have a student with a disability that is in a gen ed classroom, they have two teachers. They have a general education teacher and they have an ESE teacher. They're called varying exceptionalities teachers. They're called support facilitators, support facilitators. There's lots of different names for them, but it's the ESE teacher. Both of these teachers are collaborating for the needs of your student. And that is very, very awesome. You have the ESE teacher, they are the strategy expert. They help the gen ed teacher figure out how the student can access the curriculum. The gen ed teacher is the content expert, the math, science, reading, all that jazz. And when you have those two people working together for your student, then you really, really get that differentiation, that universally designed instruction. What your ESE teacher is bringing to the table is something called specially designed instruction, and we call it SDI. That specially designed instruction is what you are getting when you have an ESE teacher, and that is instruction that is designed specifically for your child. That specific graphic organizer or the specific practice pages that are for your child and their learning needs. So that's collaborative teaching, like I said, or sometimes it's called support facilitation. It depends on the school and the district that you're in. So those were some terms that I think are important to know if you're looking for a right fit, or if you're wondering if this is a right fit. These are things that you want to make sure are happening, that you know who both the teachers are, that teach your child. So how can you tell if it's working? If you're in a school, or you're visiting a school, you're hearing stories about school, this is a lot of different things to consider if this is working for your child. Is this the right placement? So how to know that it's working is you go to the classroom and your child is participating in activities right there with their same age peers. You see your child's classmates helping each other in academic and other activities. We know that peer support benefits all the learners. Your student, your child, your learner brings home work that gives him or her a chance to show what they know. Not just bringing home work that frustrates them or work that's too easy for them, bringing home that just right work where you can see that they have done something, they've learned something, and it demonstrates their strengths and interests. You know that your learner is in a seat that is not separating them from their peers without disabilities. If you do not want your student sitting at a back table or sitting with another adult all the time, separated from their peers. And inclusion is working if your student is in a general education setting for most of the day. There's more. That's right. There's more. They participate in extracurriculars like sports clubs. This is definitely in all grade levels. I know that's a lot of secondary too. They participate in sports and clubs alongside students without disabilities. The teacher shows commitment and has strategies of meeting the needs of the diverse learners in the class. The teacher celebrates the accomplishments of all the learners. Are students on access points? Are they getting honor roll? Are students with disabilities able to get straight A's, or I'm trying to think of other awards that I can't think of right now, but things like that. Academic awards, social awards, any of those things. Everyone is being celebrated for an appropriate thing that they're doing. Your student, your learner, your child speaks positively about other students in the class. They are greeted by the other students in their class, and your student likes going to school. I know it sounds simple, but these little things are how we know that it's working. So if you need a helping hand, and what can you do to support this? There's a few tips on how to communicate, but the first thing is ask the teacher. Ask the teacher what you can do to support your child. Sometimes just by asking that can open up a conversation that the teacher didn't know didn't know how much they needed advice from you. But by asking, that opens that is a safe space for us to have a conversation. When you've asked, then you have to stay on top of your child's learning, like any other learner. We know that these days school comes with a lot of moving parts, and so staying on top of your child's learning is a must for all learners. Read stories about friendship and belonging and diversity and inclusion and all of these things, giving good models of what friendship and what friendship looks like. So after you've asked the teacher what you can do, share ideas of what's working at home. How are you managing to get all the homework done? Do you have a good trick at home? Do you have a good reward system at home? If you can have a reward system that works at home and at school, and you can marry the two, then that creates a great um, just a great blend of things happening in both places. Which is really healthy for any learner, especially learners with disabilities who need consistency. Be a school citizen. Be at school. Volunteer. I know that we all work and that we have a lot going on. Help out where you can. Be present, and then you can really know what inclusion is looking like, how it's working for your learner. Help other families, especially those families that have students with disabilities. If you have been working in this world as having a learner with disability for a long time, you know that there's a lot to learn, and there's a lot that we don't know as in the education world. So help other families as much as you can, and then also thank the teachers for their efforts with the child. If you can build that community that supports your child, and teachers plural, remember you have 2 teachers that are teaching your child. Thank them. You want to build that community that will last for a long time and carry over from school year to school year. So if you want to email me, I'd love to know, and if there's any points that stood out to you, if there's any points of clarification, if any of these tips will help you, if you would like to get some language to have a conversation with the teachers, I can help you with that. If there's anything that stood out, I would love to know about it. And especially, I want to make sure that you have a little bit of information that you can put to work tomorrow, or a little bit more understanding of what an inclusive classroom of today looks like. Because an inclusive classroom, honestly, of 5 years ago was probably different. 10, 20 years ago, definitely different. It's changing all the time. There's so many resources out there, and these next few slides cover a lot of them. Of course, the Department of Education will take you to there. You can find the accommodations manual on there. Everything that we do as educators is there. Then there's a lot of additional supports. If you don't know about Family Cafe, which is on your screen, the bottom right, Family Cafe is a great place to go to find more resources, to connect with people, to learn what all is out there. It's familycafe.net. CARD is the Center for Autism and Related Disorders. That's the go-to place for kids on the autism spectrum. Let's see, what else? All of these other ones, multi-tiered support, systems of support. These are things that we use as educators as well on how we can support your students. The next slide, Project 10, is for later on when your children are older and transitioning out of high school into the world. Project 10 is the transition support. Project Access are the 3 people in the whole state that write the access points for your learner. And TATS is the Technical Assistance Training System, and that is for some of our younger learners, pre-K. And then we have deaf and hard of hearing resources, visually impaired resources as well. So the state of Florida has a variety of resources. Sometimes it's overwhelming, and you can start here, or I can help you connect you with somebody as well. We are the Florida Inclusion Network, so anything that has to do with your kiddo is in my purview. And if I don't know the answer, I can find out the answer, and I can connect you with someone that has the answer. This is our website, thefloridainclusionnetwork.com. And we have 4 different little packets of family resources. If you would like them, I can mail them to you. Just send me your address. And that's my email again. So it is ljenkins@contactfin.com. And I'm happy to answer any questions in private if you want to set up a phone call time, or if there's any questions now, I'm happy to do that as well. But that is the end of the overview of what the gist of inclusion is. So thank you all for listening.